Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our AMA today. My name is Mohith. I'm a developer advocate here at Salesforce. I've been joined by Stephan. Stephan, over to you.
Hi everyone, Stephan Chandler-Garcia here, also a developer advocate at Salesforce.
And we want to begin by first thanking everyone here. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I know for some of you it might be late, but thank you so much for being with us here. And we are looking forward to answer all of your questions related to developer tooling here. So please use the Trailblazer community group to post your questions. Feel free to also use the YouTube chat for the questions. But I would say it's better if you post it on our Salesforce Developers Trailblazers community group, because this way we'll have a log of the question and we can get back to you later as well.
And keep in mind, there are no bad questions. I
Yes.
personally spent the entire morning reinstalling SFDX in order to get something working properly. So we all go through these issues and challenges. So feel free to ask anything that you can in relation to tooling.
Yeah, and Stefan, just on that, there was a really good question around someone is trying to start Salesforce development, and he's trying to sign up for a developer org, and he's having troubles around getting access to it. So why don't we just go ahead and show how to sign up for a developer org? Just to sign up for a developer org, just Google Salesforce developer um, org sign up. Okay. So once you are here, you will see that the first result takes you to a form which says sign up for your Salesforce Developer Edition org. Here, just enter your first name, last name, email address, and the role and your company. And you should see an email in your inbox where you can, basically click that link and get access to it.
And this is something most people will become very familiar with. I have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dev orgs over the years. I'm sure most are the same.
Yes.
But generally, bookmark this page because you will want to visit it a lot if you're looking to just grab an org to try out something real quick. If you don't have a dev hub and you can't use Scratch orgs, and it's just a great way to get started uh, and just start building stuff with Salesforce.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things we get with this developer edition orgs is you can always enable Dev Hub there. And that allows you to create one to two, I think it's three Scratch orgs, if I remember correctly, in a day that you can create. And Scratch orgs have almost all the features, all the developer related features. So it's a nice org to play around. So while we monitor for some questions here, Stefan, why don't we talk about the new SF executable that comes in our Salesforce CLI. So one of the interesting things that we announced during the Dreamforce was this new SF executable that comes with Salesforce CLI. So all you need to do is do an SFDX update, and hopefully that works. And once you have that, you should be able to see something like, for example, let me actually go to this one of the projects that I have, and you should be able to do SF help, or in fact, you can pull up your command line terminal and just type SF help, and it should display all the SF commands. Now, the thing about these SF commands is the commands are very shortened and they have interactivity built in. So that's something, Stefan, that I love about these new set of commands. They are pretty short. I don't have to type sfdx force, config, etc., etc. It's pretty small to log in and then to deploy. I know not all of the commands are available today. Like, it definitely has some feature gap between this and the SFDX version of our commands. But what I'm excited about is these commands are very short and they're interactive, and it feels unified to me, because if I'm using any other CLI like Heroku CLI, or let's say a GitHub CLI, the commands feel the same. It's unified, same sort of experience. So how about we take a look at some demo? Now, before we do that, there's a question that has just arrived, and I'm going to read that question here so that we can get to it. So someone says, I enabled Dev Hub in my production org, and when I create Scratch org, it's creating blank org without any existing config. How can I get all config Apex in a Scratch org? So that seems like a pretty interesting question. So yes, Scratch orgs are empty orgs to begin with. Right? It'll not have any data. It'll also not have any metadata. So you will use this SFDX tooling or Salesforce CLI to push your code from your source control. Now, if you already have the code in the source control, you use some commands like sfdeploy or sfmd API deploy or force deploy commands to push your source code from your version control or from your local machine to that org. You have to deploy it. That way you'll have the metadata. Similar thing with data. You'll have to use data loader or SFDX command line to push your data set to it. So that's the way to get your metadata and data set up in that Scratch org. And anything else, Stephan, you think you would like to add or?
No, I think the key here is to make sure that you have source so that you can pull that data down from production and into your Scratch org. There are lots of great ways to pull down data from your production org to make sure that you're keeping it in source. And even if it's just for that time being, maybe you're not running your entire tool chain from source. However, you can pull down just your Apex classes, pull down just your objects, pull down just your components from your production org that you can then push into your Scratch org to make some modifications and changes, or from a sandbox into a Scratch org.
Thank you. Yeah, and if you see my screen, there is this really nice thing called org browser. So this happens when you actually kind of authenticate to environment. Let's do that, Stephan, now that we are here to see how this org browser works. So org browser, like you said, is a way to pull selectively some of the metadata. So how about, Stephan, we run this sf login, which is our new login command. And interestingly, it is interactive, as you can see. And it says you can log into Salesforce org or Salesforce functions org or function space. But for the time being, we'll log into Salesforce org. And let me find one of the orgs, this org that I have, and sort of authenticate, go through that authorization process here. So now that I have just logged in, it will tell me to set an alias for this org. Let's say, I'm going to say Dreamhouse Dev org. And it is our target org. So you see the interactivity here, right? It gives you all the options. I like this because previously we had to kind of, create or basically indicate all of these flags in our commands itself. This is more interactive than that. I just, wrote SF login, and then I'm able to log in. So I'm going to set that as my target org. So now I'm logged in, right? Now I should be able to refresh. It's saying authorize an org. Okay, so I think this is a feature parity or something between the SFDX VS Code and this. Why don't we reload and see it, Stephan? Why don't we just reload once and see if that thing. So Command Shift P and then developer window reload. I do this often, whenever I have to resolve some things. So let's see. So this actually loading of this will reactivate all the extensions. So you see it's reactivating all the extensions. And now let's try and see if the org browser thing works. It still doesn't. Why don't we try using the one here? Let me just let's just go through this. Okay, I'm jumping all over the place. So Command Shift P and then SFDX authorize an org production, and you need an alias for this. I'm gonna say Dreamhouse Dev org. I will go through the authorization again. So I imagine the previous one should have also worked, but I don't know the reason for that. But hopefully this actually works. So this did authorize. Yes, it did authorize now. And now we should. So there we go.
There we go.
There we go, the org browser. And as Stephan was mentioning, right, if you have to pull in a specific metadata, you'll see the list of all the metadata types here. And if you have to like pull in specific metadata, like let's say Apex classes, right? So we go back here and look into Apex classes. So we click on our browser, and here you can see these little icons, right, where you can download a specific class. Now, if you would like to download everything, which I don't recommend that you download every metadata from your org, because it will make your workspace a little bulkier, and it will require a lot more process, and you'll need a machine with a good RAM if you try to do everything. It's always a best practice to have your app small and modular. But you can click on this icon to retrieve everything. If you want a specific classes, you can click on that specific class. So this is a great feature, Stephan, if you are trying to just work or retrieve specific metadata from your org, and then if you want to deploy that to a Scratch org. And you can actually switch orgs as well. Like if you look at here, we can switch orgs. So these are all the orgs that I have authorized in my laptop. But let's say in your machine, if you have more than one org you authorize, so everything will be here, and you should easily be able to just click on the org and switch to that respective org. So it's like once you authorize once, and then everything gets stored here in your laptop securely, and then all you need to do is just switch between the orgs. Let's say you have an org where you want to retrieve the metadata, let's say production org from where you want to retrieve it, and then you want to switch and deploy to, let's say, a Scratch org, or you want to create a Scratch org and deploy it. All of these things are possible.
Yeah. Do you know, I actually didn't know that you could refresh your developer window from the command palette.
Oh, okay.
I've always just gone and shut down VS Code and reopened it. So that's a great tip, something that I'm definitely going to keep in mind and use quite a bit now.
Yeah, so it's pretty simple actually. So Command-Shift-P. And one of the things, Stephan, that I love about this VS Code is it has so many other utilities as well. And a lot of things we don't generally use, but there are a lot of things here that I enjoy about, like specifically, let's say this is a little bit out of context, but if somebody is using Docker, they all have Docker container support and things like that. So there's a lot of utilities in this Command-Shift-P. So that's powerful thing, like Control-Shift-P on your Windows and Command-Shift-P on your Mac. And you should be able to see many options. In fact, all of the command that you have access to, you should be able to see at. Okay, let's see if we have any other queries.
We do. And so we've got one about the consent and data use APIs. Mm-hmm. And while I don't know of any updates now, I've just sent a message to the product manager for privacy to see if we can get an update. And we'll see if we can get an update from them during this session. If not, we'll update you in the chat as well to keep up to date on a resolution there, so we can check out the roadmap for those products.
Awesome. So now that, Julian, we've seen how to sort of retrieve something from an org, how about we look at this new interactive command for deploy? I think it's really cool. So all that we need to do here is type this SF deploy. Let me clear out everything. So type this SF deploy, and it's actually interactive. You see, it's interactive. That means what it did is it kind of displayed me all the app directories that I have for my Salesforce project to deploy to another environment. And also you can deploy your functions to a functions workspace. So one thing that tripped off to me when I was playing with this new CLI, Stephan, was, I have to press space here. I'm tempted to press that enter button a lot, and that puts this whole thing off. So I'm always, tempted to press that enter button, and then it does not work. So it's space. So remember, they also have the instruction here. Press space to select, and then toggle, right? So we press the space, and then we say, okay. So here's the next thing that it asks, right? Whether you want to run the test or not. In this case, let's, just for the sake of the time, I'm just going to say don't run test. But it does give you options to select different configurations for running your tests. And then you can save these deploy options for future run. That means you can just indicate that file. It actually creates a file, a hidden file to save all those configuration in the form of JSON. Let's say yes for this. So now you see Stephan is going to go deploy this whole application to my developer org. Now I have programmed it such a way that it's going to fail because I want to show one of the features of, when it fails. Now the errors are clearly listed in a tabular format. So the UI is much better. Like you can see now, right? All of these things got created. So it said, okay, these are things that, it will be deployed successfully if everything went fine. And then it also has the component failures.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that there was a follow-up question to how to push stuff into the sandbox, that they were experiencing these kinds of errors. So this is great to see now so that we can kind of demonstrate how to debug and find those dependencies as we're building our package.
Yeah. And this errors, I was trying to debug this. So it looks like this SF deploy, and this is a bug actually, that I just notified the team here. So one of the things that's happening here, even though I set my API version to 53, for some reason, it's actually SF deploy runs with 52 version. I think it's somewhere hard coded in that CLI command, SF deploy, that it just, takes the 52-second version for some reason. Like if I do SF, config. So one of the ways to learn about all these commands is the help command, and I use a lot. If I kind of don't know much about that command. So config list. So you see my API version is set to 53, but when I'm deploying, it's still taking that 52nd version. And I think it's a bug in the SF deploy command that, there's some hard-coded thing there. But if I run that command of the older version, right, for source deploy command, I think it'll be fine. It'll deploy fine with 53 version. I can try. Let's give a try, unless we have any new question here. Okay, so somebody made a comment here. Using Control plus Shift plus P, you can type a command after that to find actual command. That's a great tip. Thank you for that, Kent. Yeah, so for example, Control plus Shift plus P, and then you say SFDX, and that gives all of the commands. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yes, so Command Shift P, and you're right, when we say SFDX, it does filter out all the SFDX commands that we have available. And that same thing applies for any extensions. Like if any of the extensions that you're using, and if it's been built properly, you will see that they will have a prefix so that we can filter out these commands pretty easily. Thanks for that comment. So let's see if there are any other questions on our chat.
Yeah, so we just had a question about how to make a component work on multiple record pages.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your component is currently only allowed on one record page, what you'll notice is if you go into your LWC mode, actually, do you have an LWC that you could show us?
Oh, definitely. This is a
source?
Dreamhouse app.
Yeah, great.
And Dreamhouse app has all the LWCs that we have.
So let's check out the property, any of the property components, property carousel.
Okay, let's look at that.
And so each Lightning Web component has a JS meta file, which controls its definition.
This one?
And so if you look at that JS meta file, so you can see here that we're targeting Lightning record pages. So Mo, if you can highlight the targets, the target there in the component allows us to select the type of page that we want it available for. So for example, this component is available on a record page, but you could also make it available on home pages. You can make it available in the app builder. You can give it and expose it to Experience Cloud sites.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the next step of this is actually configuring that target. And you can see here we have a set of target configs where one thing we can do is specify the objects that the component is available on.
Yeah.
You can extend that even more by setting fields public so that it's customizable in the Lightning App Builder, etc. But this is where you want to go if you want to expose a component to more objects. And if you want to expose it to everything, you can just remove this specific config, and it will be available for all record pages.
Definitely. And, one thing that just came to my mind, Stephan, is our sample apps, sample gallery, which has all the sample apps. And you can look at all of our sample apps for examples of this. Like e-bikes is a good one. Easy Space is also a good one. So we have lots of LWC components. In fact, LWC recipes is one that's something recommended for someone starting with LWC. But all of these components, we do have, the metadata file, and we do have configurations for them, because this one is another good example where, as Stephan was going through, like it's used in the record pages, it's used for community pages, and then there is this target configuration, and the target is set for specifically for community here with a property where the record ID is configurable. So that means this component can work on any record detail page.
Yeah, no, it's very useful for really fine-tuning access to your components. You have to think of that meta.js file as sort of the config for your LWC that really opens it up to Salesforce and makes it available. I just have a quick follow-up on the question about the consent API. The PM is going to get back to you in the Trailblazer community and reach out, and hopefully you can start a discussion there about some of the changes that you'd like to see and let you know some updates that are going on there. We do have an interesting question, Mo, and I don't know the answer to this. Mm-hmm. Can we upload files to Salesforce via SFDX using force data bulk upsert, or is there any method that you can think of for uploading files into Salesforce?
Yeah,
like files, not our metadata files.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's one of the common things, right? To upload files into your file object, or let's say into your attachments. Although I don't recommend attachments anymore because files have all the security features baked into it. Now, this is something that's not available today, in the SFDX product itself, out of box. But one thing that I recommend is Shane's SFDX plugin. This has been one of my go-to tools for anything that I don't find in the Salesforce out-of-box plugin. Right, so this plugin has a lot of commands, and one of the commands that Shane actually built was around the files. So this one, right? So it has capability to download your file and also a command to upload your file. And the best thing that I liked about this repo that Shane built, he built everything in open. So that means the code is accessible. You can fork it, you can play with it. But really, the installation for this is pretty simple. If you've never installed a CLI plugin, it's pretty simple. All you do is say SFDX install and say Shane SFDX plugins. That will install. And then Shane has a really nice documentation here for you to help with the commands. So I think one of the commands is the file command. Let's do this. So this one, Shane, right? So you execute this command, Shane data file upload. You provide your file path. And then there's a flag which says attach as a chatter or just as a file. So you don't want to use this because this goes under the chatter. But if you want to use it as a file, then you say dash file and you provide the path of the file and the name of the file, the parent ID that it has to link to, the target username of your org, of course, and the API version. And Shane also shows some really good examples here of these commands. So this is something that you can use. And I'm pretty sure if you Google, there are a lot more plugins like that from our community,
Yeah. Does Shane's do multiple files?
Just a
single?
Yeah, I think it's single.
Just single. Okay.
It's single.
So I actually use Shane's plugin a lot for pulling down large chunks of metadata.
Okay.
So if I ever need to lift and shift all of the code from an org, he's got a great plugin that uses the metadata API, and you can just do it's like SFDX Shane MD API pull and then -C, and it pulls down all the code from your org.
Oh wow.
Which is super useful.
Yeah, I think this one, right? So this is the
pull.
describe. Okay, MD API pull. Okay, so this is package. This one.
Yep, that's it. Yeah.
There you go.
And so you could do -C, -all. You could specify objects or types if you want just a specific metadata type.
Yeah.
And I use this one a lot. There are default. You could use the org browser, but I love to just go on my command line and go, okay, just give me all the code.
Right. Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I remember on our YouTube channel we did publish a video on how, let's say you want to pull specific metadata with dependencies, you can use the unpackage or unmanaged package technique, where you can create an unmanaged package and just have some metadata there and then pull all the dependencies and then just indicate the package name. It pulls everything. So something to check out. You can search by retrieve metadata, and it will show up that video. That's other way to do that. And also you can pull out from the chain sets. If you're building some kind of a declarative chain set, you can definitely use Salesforce CLI to pull that out, pull all the metadata from that. I think we have another question coming up. Okay, that was around the consent and the data use.
Yep, I've got a couple when we're ready. So once again, we've got another question around the backup tool. My suggestion would be to go and post another question on the Trailblazer community, because there's not a lot that we can tell you about that. However, I can send that to the PM and get them to respond to that post in the Trailblazer community and get you an answer there for sure. I know that's a super hot topic at the moment. We have a question, an interesting one, around DML on multiple objects in a single DML statement, like an order record and an order item. I know one thing that's been super popular, obviously, lately with the release of functions and the composite graph API is being able to do that through the APIs and through functions. And so you can actually create groupings and graphs of records to then insert with those ID references. Mo, can you think of anything that we can do in Apex to achieve this?
Yes, we can in Apex, right? So one way I had done in my in my past experience as a developer is use external IDs and use the upsert calls basically. So database.upsert allows you to say use an external ID, and there, let's say I'm inserting a child record, right? I can actually have both the parent and the child as a part of a list, and then the child's external ID, right? It will point to the parents, basically parents' external ID. Is that question on the Trailblazer community, or is it on the
that one's on YouTube?
Okay, on the chat. Okay, we'll draft something. We'll draft something, some examples, code examples for you to take a look at it.
I'm just checking Apex recipes because I feel like I wrote something like this for Apex recipes.
Okay, let's check it out.
I'll take a look and see if I can find it, and then get that back to you. It's in one of the API service recipes, as far as if I can remember correctly.
Yeah. So there are async recipes, and then collection, and then there's data recipes. Well, we'll come back to you on that. There are ways to do that actually in the Apex to insert both parent and the child records at the with the same list.
We had a quick question about how to get the org browser option VS Code. It only renders in DevHubs, correct, Mo?
Yes, so that's a very good question.
Yeah.
So this org browser only renders if you have sort of connected to a sandbox or a production or a developer org. It does not render with the Scratch orgs today. But you can actually hack through that. I have made it possible to render. So all you need to do is just authorize it once more. So I know that you do Command Shift P and then do SFDX, and then you create a default scratch arg, and then this option disappears. Now, if you know the login credentials for the scratch arg, or you can set it up in your scratch arg, just go back and say authorize an arg, and select sandbox and just authorize it, and you'll see it appears on the scratch arg. But by default, it won't appear on the scratch arg. It will only appear on your developer args, on your sandboxes and production environments, and not on the scratch args. But if you need to, you have to just authorize the arg once again with the proper credentials. Yeah. Any other questions while we are here? So, meanwhile, Stephan, why don't we get back to the stuff that we were doing, which is, I don't want to save this file, which is to make sure this thing actually gets deployed. We saw that SF deploy somehow was using the previous version of the API. I think that's a bug. And we need to talk to the product team around that. But let's use this for source deploy, because this also allows you to deploy. And there's one question that always comes to my mind here, Stephan, is what's the difference between for source deploy and this for source push command, right? So the for source push command is used with args which have the source tracking enabled. And scratch args and sandboxes have this special feature of source tracking. Now, the source tracking feature is really nice because what it allows you to do is you can really forget about which components that you are modifying. Like typically when you actually work on a Salesforce project, let's say you modified a couple of Apex classes, you created a couple of LWC components, you created a bunch of flows, and let's say you did also created custom fields and modified permission sets, right? There are a lot of metadata that you modify. Now to pull, you have to actually write it down or remember, and then use the arg browser to pull things, which works actually. But the thing is, as a developer, you don't have to now sort of remember all those things. The platform automatically tracks it for you, and that's the source tracking feature. And both the source push and the pull commands have this capability of tracking it down for you. Like you don't have to remember them. All that you do is you say SFDX for source pull, and it pulls all the metadata that you have modified. And then similarly, if you work on your local machine and use your IDE to modify certain bits of code and config, the for source push automatically identifies those and push to the server. And there is this conflict resolution also built into the system. So it's a great way to sort of improve your developer experience, to use one of these sandboxes with source tracking, or scratch args with source tracking feature. Okay. So that's the difference between for source push and for source deploy. You generally use source push when you are using those kind of source tracking args. And I personally like that, Stephan, although I would say that I have used deploy a lot, like MD API deploy and source deploy a lot as well when I'm working with, let's say, args which doesn't have source tracking. But let's say I'm beginning a new project today, I would definitely make use of that features that I have, like scratch args and sandboxes with source tracking.
Yeah, it's worth noting that coming back again to the command palette, both of these are available in the command palette.
Yeah.
And so instead of actually typing out the command, you can just open that up and go for source push.
Command Shift P. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
The lazy me will do that.
No, that's awesome. Command. That's awesome. So
you just type in push or deploy.
I think it's called deploy. I don't see them. I guess, so...
Interesting. Yeah, that's try removing the SFDX.
Yeah.
It should be in there.
So here's the thing, right? So I'll tell you this. So one of the things here that I've realized is some things appear on the file.
Oh,
like, for example, here, right?
Yeah,
they don't allow you to...
It's on a file basis.
Yeah, it's on the file basis. Now, if I do Command Shift P and do SFDX.
Yeah.
And I should see this, deploy this source to Arc,
Yeah.
right?
And you have to click the folder if you want to deploy the whole folder. Right-click the folder and you can deploy from there.
Yes.
Or the org.
Yes. Deploy source to Arc. Yes, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's try with this. Yeah. Let's try with this. So another feature that I've seen a lot of developers not sort of knowing or have missed it is this one, this little handy icon. This is so awesome. All you do is just click on this and it opens the Arc for you. It's so useful feature. It's like it's like a password store for you. Like you don't have to type in your password. Okay, I think it got deployed this time. So
it's worth noting. I also will turn on deploy on save.
Okay.
Which you can do in VS Code. Now I know a lot of times that deploy will fail, but it will give you early warnings into mistakes in your code.
Yeah.
And so if you're working on some Apex, you may have some syntax issues, whatever, it will pick them up right away.
Yeah. So
when you save, if you save frequently like I do.
This one. This is the one that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was doing some demos, Stephan, and I didn't want it to kick off this thing when I'm saving multiple files, so I disabled. But this is a really nice option, is to sort of enable this, and it kind of takes care of all those things for you. Okay, let's see if we have any other question that has come.
I have two related to functions.
Okay.
The first one of those is when it will be available in Trailhead Playgrounds. And at the moment, Salesforce Functions will not be available in Trailhead Playgrounds. However, you will be able to sign up for a trial environment of functions in a few weeks' time. So keep your eyes peeled on the Trailblazer community, on social media, because we will be announcing when that sign-up is available. And you will be able to get a trial org for functions. It will just be separate from your Trailhead Playground. It will be a separate sign-up link to that. And the second one is about functions pricing. Please reach out to your AE as they can provide transparent pricing on functions. They are generally available. We have lots of customers now using functions and getting their hands on them. So reach out to your account team or your partner account manager, anyone who is on that side of things at Salesforce, and they can get you information on functions and the pricing on.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Stephan, for sharing all those details. Okay. What are other things, other questions that we have our way? Just monitoring our questions. So other thing that, Stephan, I want to show something that the CLI team did, last year, and they continue to do it, is open sourcing their whole sort of code base. And, they have created their own GitHub repository, and it's called Salesforce CLI. And this is their own repository. It's not on Trailhead Apps. It's not on Force.com. It's a brand new, repository. And a lot of their projects are all public. Like you can see, the plugin source, the auth plugin that we use to log in, the whole source code for SFDX CLI. So all of this is open source. That means they are sharing everything with the community here. It's a lot of open source code. Of course, there's not a lot of documentation around it, but there's a lot of code to digest and look at it. If you are, really interested in learning how these tools are getting built at Salesforce, right? They're all open source for you. And one of the things that I thought it was interesting to me was when I looked at this repo called, when I type SF, it has this repo called SF Plugin Score. And this project, again, it's a very new project. I think it's been just 4 months since this project. So this has utilities for writing SF plugins. So remember, we just showed you the commands like SF login, which was interactive, SF deploy. These are all interactive. And on Twitter, I saw a question around, okay, how would one go about building something like that? They want to build Salesforce CLI plugin, but they also want to make sure that, they are following all the best practices and all the user design that we at Salesforce are bringing to all these new, SF executable, like making it interactive, keeping it unified, keeping it simple, right? So this has utilities for writing. Like, for example, if I go to their source code, This has utilities for, let's say, a prompter, right? So prompter is something, Stephan, let's say, you typed a command and then you want to display a set of questions to your user, kind of a form on a CLI. Think of it as a form, right? But it's more interactive than that. Like, for example, we saw when I typed sfdeploy, we were picking up that option of, okay, which folder we want to deploy to Salesforce, right? Or when we did sflogin, it prompted me to say, pick up, the functions org or functions. Which one would you want to choose for login, whether you want to log in into Salesforce or functions, right? So that's really a good way, right, to present from a user experience perspective. Like, instead of asking me to do a help command and figuring out all the flags, it's prompting, so it's more interactive. So they have this prompter.ts, which is kind of a generic library which uses this module called Enquirer, which is an open source npm module. So they show how to use Enquirer. So they have some utilities like that, like, for example, for hooks, right? So hooks is something that is like, let's say you're running a command and let's say a user just input the value. Like, for example, you're asking yes or no. Let's say on a yes, I want to listen for that specific action and further write some logic, right? So hooks are for that. And they show an example of how to use all these hooks. So there are a lot of utilities here that I would recommend if someone is building Salesforce CLI plugin and they want to, keep that plugin interactive. You'll find a lot of code samples here. In general, you'll find a lot of code samples and examples here, including, the testing framework. I think they have this. So one of the things that I liked about this whole repo is it's open source. I can go and look at it anytime. It's all public, as you can see. So CLI plugin test kit. I think this is awesome because you can write the commands, but we never had something which can perform like what we call it as nuts here, which is non-unit tests, meaning they're more like an integration test where you want to throw up the command and run that using shell.js and then parse out and see what the results are. So this is a really nice utility which allows you to, or which shows you how you can write these tests, non-unit tests. So that's really cool. I think it's really awesome that they make this open source.
We've got a question not necessarily related to tooling, but around LWCs, and we have someone asking how you can resize the LWC when it's rendered in a quick action.
Okay.
And the way that you're going to need to do this is to target the actual parent element. And so if you wrap your component in a div and then target it with some style from CSS, you should be able to set the min height. So I would set the min height to like 50%, 60%, however you want it to fit within the window, and you should be able to resize it that way. Or I generally will suggest that people go and grab the standard SLDS modal markup from the design system website.
Yeah,
and use that as the wrapper for your component. If you're wanting to tweak the base styles, go in and grab the actual markup from the design system website instead of using the base component, and then you can target it. So, for example, in the modal, if you go into is there a large modal? Yeah, there's a large modal there. So click the large modal. Yeah. And so you can see here, we've set that SLDS modal to large in the top line class.
Yeah.
So that's just an example. You can do that, or you can target it directly from your CSS and define the sizing there. And that should help you get a custom size for your quick action.
Interesting. Yeah, this seems really cool. And I have the Mozilla website open because every time I hear JavaScript or CSS question, the first thing I go is to developer.mozilla.org to find out what it is.
That's great.
Okay, that's cool. Any other questions? Feel free to use use the chat, or just ask me anything here with our any of our hashtag, and we'll keep monitoring. So we do have some questions here, right? So if a home page or any page has 10 components, and after deployment, I want to refresh each component separately from UI, can I do that without reloading the page? It's an interesting one. It's 10 components, and after I want to refresh each component separately from UI. So this is, so for this question, I would, basically need more info. Like, is it during the development phase that they are asking? Like, can they, avoid having to refresh their page just to see the, how the components are behaving? Or is it, after like the components are wired together, they plan to refresh? So there's a little bit of ambiguity there. So if someone can clarify that, we'll get answer to that. We do have some more lightning questions. So there is something called lightning data table is not supporting rich text area field at this moment. Yeah, any plans for that in the near future? So that's a question that I think we will have to go back to the product to get the roadmap on. Stephan, I know that you can add a custom component in that lightning data table.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, if is there a possibility where we can just have that one column switch to a custom component, and that could be a rich text component?
Yeah.
I guess.
So I've not done this in the past. However, you can see. I found a Stack Exchange answer for it.
Okay.
That I'd be happy to share, but you can extend Lightning Data Table by creating a custom column type that is rich text.
Yeah.
And so I can share that answer on the Trailblazer community question with the Stack Exchange solution for that.
Yep. And here's the question, and this seems to be a really interesting question that I'm gonna go like for this question. Is there a best practice regarding JavaScript error logging? It's a really interesting question. I think we have done some work in that area with our sample apps. I know that we have handled some exceptions in our JavaScript LWC, I think we have a unique way of doing it. Let me find that. So I think it's called error panel, right? So in the error panel, we have this generic library, sort of a JavaScript library, where what we do is we show how to like display error messages through this error panel component. And I think if you dig through this example, there will be examples where it'll show us how we use this component in the whenever there is an error. So basically what I do is generally go try catch and then sort of render an error panel. That is what I do. Is there any other way, Stephan, that you think is the right way to do JavaScript error logging?
I mean, that's probably the best way to do it. We have a utility for reducing errors in a lot of the sample apps as well.
Yeah.
That will allow you to get those and pull those out into a component much easier, so that you can pull them out of the the actual message out of the error object. From a debugging perspective, always install the Lightning Inspector extension into Chrome, because that's a great place to really dig deep into errors when you're pulling them out, but not necessarily for logging.
On LWC, I just remember using promises a lot, and then catching those promises. So it's important that when you use promises, you also have a catch block in case anything goes wrong, so that you can catch that exception and either use a error panel there to show that to the user. Now, when you're showing to the user, it is not that much meaningful, Stephan, to show that actual log and the error message, right? So we anticipate, usually it's like, okay, all the known errors that you have, you can put a user-friendly error message, map that to a user-friendly error message on the screen. But let's say if something goes really weird, right? You can basically use the the logs to just throw it on the browser so that it's easier for you to debug, but at the same time you're not throwing that information to your actual end users. Something that I have. Okay, so we are 10 minutes, or in fact, I would say like we are just 5 more minutes away from concluding this call. So thank you so much for actually putting all these questions here, Valerie. It really helps us because we can go back and look at some of these and try to find out, all of these. I would like to take this interesting question, not this one, but this one. We'll get back to this question for sure. But this one, Stephan, which says, is there an Apex guide or recipe on how to create PDF file purely in backend without reference to Visual Force page? I think VFP is Visual Force page. It seems like Visual Force page is the way to go about it, but it really makes sense for the functions. Because in functions you can completely generate these PDF files on backend, right? Would you recommend functions for this, Stephan?
I mean, that's sort of the go-to now for generating PDFs on the fly. We don't really have any other capability within Apex other than using a Visual Force page to be able to go and do that.
Yeah, and Apex, is limiting in terms of this specific functionality because you need more, more CPU power to do this, and that's where you need both here, like the CPU power, and also you need some kind of a utility. You don't want to write that whole PDF generation kind of logic and framework in Apex, and of course you'll hit the boundaries of Apex here. So this functionality usually it's better if you could just use Salesforce functions or Heroku or something like that. Okay, so I heard so we covered through this. This was interesting. Now I'm working on a company and I'm the only one who is working in Salesforce and fresher, and I can't get any kind of help. So how do I continue? That's a really good question, Sanjay. I recommend you use the community and Trailhead to skill up. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find content from us, all of the developer advocates. And if you have any question, just feel free to post it on this group itself, which is the Salesforce developer group here in the Trailblazer community. And I'm pretty sure somebody will get back to you with all your queries. And hang in there. It's gonna be tough for maybe a few rides, but once you're through, you'll love the platform. Yeah, so this question we did answer a long back. Like, is it only possible to fetch only conditions from Apex, like only if or else, or what kind of metadata we get from Apex class? This is pretty, again, it requires more clarification. Can you show us how to get the org browser option? How to get the org browser option? How much minutes we have? We have 2 more minutes. Oh, I can try, but if not, I'll get back to you. But really, all you do is Command Shift P and then create a scratch org. Let's do that. Dev org. I'm just gonna say dev org, and I'm gonna just create a scratch org. Now you'll see, as soon as I have a scratch org here, the org browser will disappear. So the scratch org, hopefully the scratch org is not gonna take much time. But while it does, I'm gonna look at other questions here. Okay, I think we've covered most of them, and for some of them which we have not been able to, we will get back on all of these questions for you. So as you can see now, the scratch orgs are there, the cloud icon is gone. You see that? Mm-hmm. And the way to do that is first actually go back to that scratch org that you have just created, and all you need to do is, now I might run out of the time, but I'm just going to give you the steps here. So all you can do is go to your user record. Right, so go back to your user record, like for example this user, which is your system admin, and change password. Now to change password, you need the current password. So you can actually get that by doing SFDX Salesforce, I think it's called org display and verbose, I guess, or user display verbose, whatever it is. I think it's the org display won't give it. I think it's the user display. Force user. What's that command? I'm not actually. Yeah, so you can generate a new password. I would do this. In fact, I would do SFDX, and basically I would do this. I would go and where's my command terminal? Yeah. So let me clear this up. So I would do this SFDX and then say force user password, and then I think it's the password generate. So I would run that password generate, and then once we do that, it'll give you a password. So you can use that password to change to whatever password you want. Once you do that, all that you need to do from that point is do Command Shift P and then say SFDX and then do an authorize an org. It'll take you to the org, just log in with the credentials, and you should see an org browser here. You should be able to do pretty much same thing. Just don't forget that ScratchOrgs has sandboxes, so you'll have to select the sandbox when you're authorizing. Okay, I think we are almost running out of the time, but do check out the next episode. I think the Kevin is live with his episode on something interesting where he's going to live code, and we'll be off the hook. Anything else, Stephan, that you would like to add here?
Now, keep the questions coming. We'll go back and respond to anything that we missed in the Trailblazer community. We'll hopefully get back to you with all the answers that you need.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.